Hello and welcome to another episode of the AFI Cover 7 podcast. Daniel, I'm very excited to talk to you about a very exciting week one in the ELF offseason. For months since the championship, or weeks I should say, fans have been waiting for November 1st as the unofficial start to the ELF offseason. We're very excited to break down. A lot of teams have been moving quick already. Big names, familiar names, some new names, switching destinations. We're really excited to get into it. Daniel, any initial thoughts on the first few days of the ELF offseason?
Yeah, I think it's been great. I think that November 1st date that Elf set as the time when teams could talk to other teams' players within the league. Mm-hmm. Prior to that, they could speak outside, and we saw signings like Max Zimmerman going to Berlin, for example. But now is when the juicy stuff happens. We want to see when players leave teams and kind of make up our own stories, I guess, as to why they left those teams in the first place. Maybe did they leave them because they were unhappy with the organisation, unhappy with the record, or they just wanted more money? We don't know, but it's always fun to speculate.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how many players move between ELF teams and how many move from other leagues, like the German Football League or Italian Football League. It's going to be quite a recruiting dynamic.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's hard to imagine a guy leaving Elf for intentionally to play in GFL or the Italian Football League nowadays. Do you know what I mean? That's what I think anyway. I mean, that Elf is the biggest stage, right? And surely that's why you play football, to play on the biggest stage.
Situations are situational.
Okay. That's true. No, I get you totally. Yeah, and we never know people's like personal situations or kind of. Maybe they dislike something about Elf for whatever reason. So we never know. But either way, so far it's been exciting. We've seen a few big names switch teams, a few re-signings, and we're kind of waiting to see what happens at the quarterback position, I guess. And for a lot of teams, that's obviously the most important position on the field. So
let's jump right into it then. Speaking of quarterbacks, the Februar, forgive me if I butchered that pronunciation. Our new team in the ELF from Hungary, near Budapest, the Enthroners, found a quarterback that you really liked from Leipzig last season.
Yeah, Gabriel Cunningham. I think he was great. I didn't know much about him prior to him joining Elf last year. I did a bit of research on him. And he actually played in Germany before that in GFL 2, which I didn't know. He played in the indoor league as well. Indoor league in the States, that is. For
Sugar Skulls.
Sugar Skulls, that was it, yeah. Where are they from?
Tucson, I think.
Tucson, not Tuscany. I'm talking about Tuscany, yeah. Tucson, yeah.
Too much Italian football.
I know, right, yeah, Tuscany, yeah. I think he was great. And what he did in Leipzig was unbelievable. Like, he exploded onto the scene. In 3 games, 252 yards, 10 touchdowns, just 3 picks, then rushing the ball, 354 yards and 3 touchdowns. That's insane. Over 3 games and on a team that had pretty much no running game, right? They had holes. They had some great players in some places, but they had a lot of holes in the team as well. And that's why their record wasn't great at the end of the season.
What an odd team, right?
I know, yeah.
I watched, I didn't watch every snap from the Kings, but I did watch highlights, and Cunningham was hard to miss. He made so many exciting plays. Really fun player to watch. I think Enthroners got a good one there. Exactly.
And if Throners, I mean, we've all probably seen Throners dominate in domestic league or play one for a long time anyway. Played great football out of Hungary for a long time. And so if they have the pieces in place, it wasn't because Leipzig obviously came out of nowhere, right? They weren't an already established team. And so maybe when you do that, it's sometimes hard to find players in particular positions and have consistency and depth. Whereas if you've had a team for a long time, then you've probably got that depth. Not in every case, but maybe you do, and especially where the Enthroners are they're the only team in Hungary, the only Elf team in Hungary, right? And so you're going to get a lot of the domestic and national talent coming to that team. But same with Milano, same with Istanbul, same with the Paris team now. I think they can have a lot of depth, and they could support Cunningham, so he doesn't have to do everything on his own. But when you need him, he can make those splash plays and win him some games.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if they pair him with a running back or an American receiver. I would guess, looking at the film, him and Shontavious Jones were quite a combo last year. I could see them getting an American receiver to pair with him. Especially, we've seen some Hungarian football, covered some Hungarian football on AFI, and they got some dogs. playing running back out there. I mean, we've seen, whenever I turn on Hungarian Football League, somebody's getting hurdled, somebody's getting trucked. There's some good running backs out there. I don't know all their names, but they're good, and I'm sure they're eager to play for the Enthroners.
Yeah, and it's going to be their first season as well on the international stage, and they're going to want to show out and show that they can play football and show that they deserve to be on the international stage.
Absolutely. Another new name that I really liked was Aaron Jackson. Aaron Jackson, some of you guys might know him who were watching the German Football League. He's been playing for the Cologne Crocodiles the last few years in Germany. GFL All-Star back in 2021. GFL All-Star this year as well. This year he put up 91 catches, almost 1,500 yards, 17 touchdowns. 6'2", can just elevate, jump the ball, jump up, win jump balls, red zone scoring machine. Now he's paired in Berlin with two great German receivers in Robin Wilczek and Max Zimmerman. I think the receiving core in Berlin is scary.
It really is. And if you look at Aaron Jackson, he tried out for the Arizona Cardinals, I think last year or this year, whenever it was, for a reason, right? You don't get a call up from Germany to an NFL team for no reason. He has the measurables, he has the playability to play at an elite level, i.e. the highest level in the world, the NFL. And so there's no reason he's not going to dominate the ELF the same way he dominated GFL for a long time. And, as you said, paired with Wilczek, who had the highest average this year, I think, with receivers over with over 30 receptions or 20 receptions or whatever it was, and nearly 30 yards per reception.
Wow.
He was scoring a touchdown every 3 receptions.
Wow.
Insane, right?
Yeah.
Aaron Jackson's, again, a big time playmaker, a deep threat, can do everything. So, like, with those guys on the field together, it's going to be scary. But whether they re-sign JoJo Nero is another question. I know you quite like him, right?
I do like him. I know that this guy is a fighter. 3rd and 9, I remember seeing him tuck the ball, run, truck a linebacker for the first down. He's not a typical quarterback who slides. He fights for every yard. We saw him in 2021. He played in the German Football League for the Kiel Baltic Hurricanes, who were terrible. And he fought, didn't quit. He was putting up crazy numbers for a really bad team. I just think this guy has like the heart of a warrior, and Berlin has a good one.
I agree with his approach to the game. I think he is an absolute animal. And I remember at the start of the season, and you saw those elf videos of Joe like kind of pumping his team up.
Yeah.
Like, he's a team guy. Everyone seems to love him and get behind him. But did he do enough this year? Right, he ended, I think, like 7th in the league in yards and touchdowns. It just wasn't that great. It was like 21 touchdowns and 9 interceptions.
Okay.
That's not great. Do you know what I mean? And especially when you have someone like Wilczek. Obviously now you're bringing in Aaron Jackson and Zimmerman. Is that to support JoJo Nero, or is that to bring in someone new who can maybe do more?
Maybe.
So yeah, I don't know. I think, and they got a new head coach there as well, right? Oh no, the same head coach.
I believe Schmuck is back.
He's back. Okay,
Yeah.
fine. Schmuck's back. Okay, fine. Same head coach. So yeah, I don't know. We'll see how they progress. But they're definitely leaning on that passing game, right? They, yeah. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens.
We'll see. I mean, they do have a big-time GM, Bjorn Warner, former NFL first-round draft pick, German guy. He might say, "Hey, I want to really upgrade my QB position," and they go pick someone, through his NFL connections, or they find someone who might be interested. We don't know.
And they moved away from Jockers Crawford as well, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Like the second rusher in the league. He wasn't too far behind Glenn Tonga, who had an absolute monster season. I think Tonga had about 21 touchdowns, and I think Crawford only had about 10. So that was a bit different. But the yards were there. The yards weren't that far off. And so to move away from one of the best players in the league and pick up an American receiver, not to say that Aaron Jackson isn't equally as dominant, but it tells you something, right? It tells you that, hey, we want to win through the air.
Yeah.
And so whether JoJo Nero is the person to do that is another question.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what they do there. Crawford was fun to watch. I hope he comes back to the ELF.
I think he will. I mean, we've seen him promoting himself on social media. Put his highlight tape out saying he's a free agent. He seemed to love Elf. He seemed to love like the lights of Elf.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so yeah, there's no reason. And I think any team, someone like Leipzig, Do you know what I mean? Leipzig, that is a perfect fit for him. A team that had no running game. Bring him down. Why not?
Boy, imagine him behind the Hamburg line.
That's another great place because we've heard rumours that Tonga's actually going to retire, right? That this might be his
unofficial. We'll see.
Unofficial, yeah. This is just through the grapevine. But he might retire and he might be done. But he's probably still on the fence a bit. And I think a perfect replacement, like you said, would be Crawford. Who, do you know what I mean? What could he do with a O-line as good as Hamburg's?
Yeah.
What he did in Berlin was great, and that O-line wasn't half as good as Hamburg's.
Yeah. So who's another name that you looked out for this week?
A signing that I really like is Marc Mattioli. This is a few weeks back. The head coach in Paris. I've known Mattioli for a little while now. Like spoken to him on and off. I've been following his career quite closely in Parma for the last 2 years.
Okay.
I think he's a great coach. I was lucky enough to see him speak at a conference in Berlin, a coaching convention. And just his approach to the game is so unique and so kind of obvious and straightforward. He really focuses on the fundamentals and playing sound fundamental football. And I think with a new franchise, that's going to be crucial, right? Not doing anything flashy, bringing in the tools to make the team successful straight away is going to be obviously crucial for him. And I think he might try and bring in maybe some of the Parma guys.
Sure.
Maybe someone like Nick Diaco, Riley Hennessy. The linebacker they had there, Dawson Dales, someone like that. Do you know what I mean? And so I think the French team has so much potential, raw athleticism, untapped. People haven't really seen French football too much. They had a lot of success in the European Championships a couple of years back. It'd be. I think he's going to be a great fit there, and I think he's a great coach. And I think Paris are very lucky to have him.
Yeah, this guy has proven himself at the European level. He came over to Europe after coaching in the Pac-12, in the SEC. Really at the upper echelons of the game. And that showed with his first year in Europe. He won the championship in Italy, was in the playoffs again in his second year, and then helped out the Leipzig Kings at the end of last year. So if I was building a program in Europe, I would be very excited to have Mark be the leader of that.
100%. And I think you spoke about him joining Leipzig at the end. He's already had that experience in Elf. Role he was a receivers coach there, a role that he was kind of grossly overqualified for.
Right.
But it was something I guess he wanted to dip his toes in and see, hey, what is Elf like? And he went in there, and we saw. There's no coincidence that Gabriel Cunningham, the then quarterback of Leipzig Kings, went on a absolute terror for 3 games, throwing for 652 yards and 10 touchdowns.
Yeah.
And that's when Marc Mattioli was there. Do you know what I mean? There's no coincidence that happened, right? Super excited to see what he does and some of the pieces that he can bring. He's got a lot of connections in Europe already. Mm-hmm. It's not as if he's fresh to Europe. He's made connections, and so I think he can bring in some big names. Can't wait to see their signings.
I think it'll be an easy draw to Paris for sure.
Definitely.
Another name that I really liked was Darius Robinson. Darius becomes the first Munich Raven player ever. History being made. And that's not the first time Darius has touched history. This guy is a veteran in Europe. The connection to Munich is interesting because he played for the Swarco Raiders back in 2019 when they won the Austrian Bowl, they won the Cephal Championship, and Robinson was a big part of that. Sean Shelton now moves from the Swarco Raiders, of course, to Munich. Who does he get? His old friend, Darius Robinson, to be their first official player. This guy was dominant in 2021, very good in 2022, was all Europe, AFI all Europe, and I think Munich really solidified its secondary with him.
Yeah, I like Darius Robinson. I think he's a great player. Everyone knows that. No one can argue against that. I think he slightly fell off this year, if I'm honest, compared to his previous years and the dominance that he has shown.
Really?
Yeah, I think compared to what he was before, he wasn't as good, right?
There's less interceptions.
There was no interceptions.
There was no interceptions.
Yeah.
But I think part of that is people were scared to throw his way.
That could be true. Definitely that could be true. And I think we saw maybe Goran Zec, the DB, the Serbian DB that came in and he led the league in interceptions. Maybe because teams were afraid to throw Darius his way. I'm not sure.
Maybe.
But yeah, so Darius, I don't know. I don't want it to be a thing about I'm doubting his ability because I'm really not.
It sounds like you are.
No,
There's a lot of hesitation there.
No, there is. Yeah, just because it's like that's your first time. I guess it's a big name, and he can come in. How old is he now? 31, 30?
30, around 30, I think.
Around 30, yeah. Back him in his career, I guess he can be a leader, right? Regardless of anything else. I'm sure he still offers a lot on the field, but he can also be a leader. He's played in Europe for a while. He's got that relationship with Sean Shelton, like you said. So yeah, I'm sure he'll do well. I just don't know if he was the best DB on offer, right? I think Amari Williams was the best DB on offer.
Sure. I think it's going to be hard to lure Amari away from Jim Tomsula and the Rhein Fire, just because that environment in Dusseldorf, I imagine, is insane to play for. Especially when you've played in some small stadiums in Europe with 50 people watching, right? Obviously, ELF is above that and has transcended that, which is great. But I think Dusseldorf took it to a next level compared to, teams that we saw with maybe 500, 600 fans.
Yeah, definitely. And like you said, I mean, they're averaging I think about 10,000 per game.
Number was crazy.
It was insane, right? And like you said, Jim Tula, former NFL head coach. Yeah. Right? Yeah. They didn't have the success I'm sure they wanted, but they brought back Jadrian Clark, right? And so it's like, I guess they felt they had something, but they want to keep moving. But they haven't announced any other signings, and Amari Williams, I really feel like he was the best DB in Europe this year, best American DB in Europe this year. And I think any team would be like happy to have him, and which is why I feel like maybe Munich, maybe they tried with him, and I don't know, but he was an absolute baller, and wherever he goes is going to be great.
Well, maybe that's a debate to watch: Amari versus Darius this next season. Who's the better American DB?
Amari's a lot younger though, isn't he?
I think he's a little bit younger.
Yeah. I think he's got more ahead of him, whereas Darius is kind of on the back end of his career.
Yeah, Justin Rogers. We'll throw you in there, maybe.
Yeah, Border as well. Yeah, those two top three DBs. Yeah, without a doubt, Darius, Amari, and Justin. But yeah, no, Amari was my favorite for me.
Yeah, it's hard to argue against that. Yeah. I mean, Amari was really special this last season. Who are some free agents left on the board, like you hinted to Amari, that you were really excited about?
Yeah, there's a few, and I think like the European guys are really significant as well. Like Davidzinyan, the UK linebacker from Berlin. There's again no coincidence that their success kind of began when David came in. Sure. Obviously, he was a part of this, like lots of great pieces, but he's a vital piece of that defense because he's a monster. He's an absolute wrecking ball, and he makes teams not want to run up the middle, right? Yeah. He makes teams not want to try and run sideline to sideline because he can do both those things at a quite scary pace and like hurt people like ball carriers. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so I think he's a European player. European players are always going to be high in demand. They've lowered the cap this year to 6, right? I mean, lowered the
European limit. Yeah.
European limit to 6 this year, which will obviously change a few things. But Davidzinyan, another one, Goran Zec, as I spoke about earlier, one of the most kind of underrated players in the league. I feel like arguably one of the best players in the league. Led the league in interceptions, made a bunch of tackles, a bunch of forced fumbles, a bunch of sacks. Those are two guys that I'm really kind of excited about. Yeah,
I've heard a rumor that Goran is trying to play in the Canadian Football League, which I think is achievable for him, to be honest. Looking at who's kind of bounced in and out of that league the last few years, I think Zec last year, or Zec, put his foot out there in a good way. Guys that I'm excited to see if they come back in the ELF is definitely the German gunslinger, Jan Vinereich. I hope he ends up with another ELF team. He has officially parted ways with the Cologne Centurions. The guy put up big numbers last year, but for whatever reason, it didn't really turn into wins for Cologne. I'm sure there's many factors to that. I just like homegrown quarterbacks. I think it's important to gain the long-term growth of football in Europe to have some German quarterbacks, some French quarterbacks, some British quarterbacks, some European quarterbacks spread out throughout. So I hope he doesn't fade away. I hope he can stay in the league in some capacity.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think Jan, obviously, like you said, he put up insane numbers, and he started the league like on an absolutely insane pace. He just kind of fell off. I know he had a few injuries, I think, like a shoulder injury and something like that. So, and that obviously affected him. But I think it was just hard to kind of keep up with what he was doing because maybe his supporting cast wasn't the best. Do you know what I mean? And he's still, and you got to realise that like a lot of these European QBs are still developing, right? Like in the States, like you're playing like 3, 4, 5 times, 60 times of snaps that a European player is going to play, right? And at a position like QB, those are absolutely vital where it's kind of like mind first. Right,
so much mental game. Yeah,
it is a mental game, and so I think Jan is going to kind of always be a victim of that, unfortunately, as any European player is compared to the US guys, obviously. But yeah, I mean, if Jan can sign for a team like if you put Jan in the situation that Cisse was in, the Hamburg quarterback last year, like they probably would have won the championship, right? Because if Jan could put up those numbers with 2 American receivers, and you got to forget that's the thing that a European QB allows you to do is go after more Americans. Right, to support you, and if you can kind of spread the ball around and force teams to look, if you know you got one American, okay, we'll lock down that American with our American, done, right?
Yeah.
However, if I have 2 Americans, it's like okay, you lock down with your American here, but then what over here? You're struggling.
Mismatch.
Yeah, exactly, mismatch on a European DB in most cases. So yeah, he can kind of change that whole dynamic for a team, but whether a team trusts a European QB to take them to the final, because like I said, there's a lot to it. I mean, the composure, maybe just experience and so on. And yeah, we'll see if that happens. But I think he's a really exciting prospect, and it's interesting to see where he goes.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if nobody signs Jan to be the starter, and then injuries happen. Who knows what happens? And then suddenly Jan is in high demand mid-season. I could easily see that happening, and Jan ends up with some team stepping in and being the starter right away.
I don't think that happened. I think Jan wants to be the guy. Like he was the guy, and he like led the league for 4 or 5 weeks in passing, right? And doing it very well. It wasn't just like a fluke or anything. Do you know what I mean? So I think he wants to be the guy, and if an Elf team doesn't pick him up, I think he'll go for the GFL team, or maybe even an Austrian team or I don't know. But I can't see him taking a backup role voluntarily in Elf.
I guess we'll see. Only he knows. Yeah, the quarterback carousel we saw happen a little bit last year. It'll be interesting to watch for sure. I mean, what quarterbacks do we have coming back signed? We have Cunningham back. Luke Zaraka is back in Milan. And the rest are up in the air as of now.
Sean Shelton retired.
Yep.
You can't imagine Vienna wanting to get rid of Jackson Erdmann.
No.
But does he want to come back? When you're American and you're German, you're away from home, you might get homesick, and it's like when you're chasing the championship, it's different. Right, guys, we're going to come back and win the championship next year. I've won the championship at the highest league in Europe.
Right.
Do I want to come back? Maybe he does, but I'm not sure.
It's going to be really interesting because the elite American imports suddenly have more options to play. The XFL is starting this spring. The USFL is back. We've seen guys who played in Europe now go to these leagues, and it's going to be a little bit tougher for European GMs to convince Division I studs, hey, come to Europe and play, when potentially they're being courted by USFL or XFL.
And especially if you've had maybe an NFL tryout, like Jackson Erdmann, I believe Carolina.
He was on the
Panthers?
Radar for a few different teams. He had a few workouts.
So he was on the radar. He got an agent. Do you know what I mean? His agent's obviously well connected. Hey, you remember Jackson? He went to so and so. Do you know what I mean? He's a kind of obvious choice. He's been playing in Vienna, the highest league in Europe. He just won the championship. That's an easy sell for an agent into the XFL. So yeah, maybe he's gone, and maybe those Americans that were playing in Elf previously, they want that as well.
Yeah.
Why would you not want to play in the XFL? Like, especially if you're like kind of like 25 and remember Turpin from Realclaw Panthers.
Yeah, look at him
went
now.
to the USFL. Now he's one of the Cowboys' most electric players.
Yeah.
Like the league is high on this guy, right? For an obvious reason, and so Americans are going to see that and be like, Can I do that?
Absolutely.
Can I end up in the NFL? And so, like you said, it's going to be hard to keep those guys.
Yeah, and it's a selling point for the ELF, but I mean, any American is going to choose USFL or XFL over ELF. It's going to be really hard to pull those guys who really are on the radar of those spring leagues. Anyway, that's a little bit off topic, but it's going to come into recruiting, honestly. I think because of that, we'll see a lot of guys returning as opposed to plucking guys from the NCAA.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, as you said, I mean, there are a few other QBs on the market. Connor Miller, he didn't play very long in Leipzig because he got injured, and that's the reason Gabriel Cunningham came in. Connor Miller's done some great things in Europe before, whether in Graz Giants in Austria, for the Paris Flash in Paris. Yeah, and he didn't play very long, so it's kind of hard to evaluate him, I guess, as an L fit. But maybe they might bring him back. Zach Edwards, is another name. Obviously, one of the league's probably best players in the league, maybe the MVP. Maybe he was a bit he was
my MVP over Sheldon, I have to say.
I agree.
I think he got robbed.
Yeah, he was definitely kind of I agree. But yeah, him and Carl Sweet obviously had an amazing connection. They're very close as well. It's rumored that Zach isn't too happy in Barcelona right now, and he's looking for a new team. And so obviously where he goes, Carl could go. That's probably one of the most electric receivers in the league, the most electric duos in the league.
All right, so week 1 is basically wrapped up in the ELF offseason. Let's take a look at the Northern Conference. So that includes the Berlin Thunder, the Realclaw Panthers, the Leipzig Kings, and the now 2-time runner-up Hamburg Sea Devils.
That sounds like an insult.
Daniel, let's talk about the Leipzig Kings, a team that you know well. Cunningham is gone. Fred Armstrong is gone. John Booker's the new head coach. Seems like there's a lot of work to do in Leipzig.
Yeah, 100%. And I think they need to add a bit more dynamism to their offense. I think last year they lent entirely on that passing game. I think asking a QB to throw 50 times a game is going to lead to lots of sacks and injuries, interceptions, turnovers, as it will at any level of the game, which is why they were chasing the game a lot. So I think they need to add a new element to their offense, and that is a running game, right? They had no rushing game last year, so they need to add that. So maybe bring in some pieces of O-line, bring in another running back or an American running back potentially. Who knows?
I think we could see that.
But yeah, so I think John Booker will just try and add another element to that offense, because their defense was great last year. They had some really good pieces in AJ Wetland, William James.
Aslan,
Zetterberg. So they had a really good defense. It was just a shame their offense couldn't do much. In the back end they could, but so yeah, I think that's what John Booker will try and do this year.
Definitely. Another team I'm looking at that has a lot of work to do is the Realclaw Panthers. Jakob Samuel, the head coach, he now moves to the sporting director role, leaving the head coach position open. I think they'll be able to retain most of the Polish talent in the area. However, Darius Robinson is now gone, and I think with the new head coach coming in, they're going to have new imports, and it's going to be a lot of new faces in that Panther blue next season.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think they were also hit by the injury bug last year. Mm-hmm. Their star quarterback went down. The star quarterback went down in the first, I think in the second or third week he was injured and had to go home. A few weeks later, their quarterback went down again. They were throwing the ball a lot and throwing a lot of interceptions. Their defense was great though. I think Darius Robinson, Goranzec, they played really well. Goranzec obviously led the league in interceptions, a bunch of forced fumbles and sacks, loads of tackles. So I think it'd be hard to keep Goranzec, and obviously Darius Robinson's already gone. So I think maybe just rebuilding around your Polish talent.
Sure.
Bring in a QB who's healthy. Bring in a playmaker on offense, also maybe a receiver or a scat back who can catch the ball at the backfield, something like that.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. I think they'll find a head coach who has really good experience. They have this connection to Gary Kubiak, who's been a consultant for the team, and I'm sure Gary Kubiak knows a few young coaches who would like to be a head coach and run their own show in the ELF. So I think they'll have a good American head coach come in who will be able to pull in some serious talent as far as imports in Realclaw. Moving on to the Berlin Thunder, a lot of changes as well. Jock Crawford, gone. Aaron Jackson, yes, he's in with Max Zimmerman, giving them a dynamic receiving core. What do you think Berlin is trying to do next?
Obviously, they're moving away from the running game and moving towards the passing game. Wilczek averaged, as I said before, I think it was 27 yards per reception. He was scoring a touchdown every 3 receptions. It was insane. You add Aaron Jackson and Max Zimmerman to that as well. that's got to be one of the best receiving corps in the NFL. Yeah, he left, sorry, almost overnight. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Can Joey G, as I'm calling him.
I like it. Joey G.
Yeah, he's I don't know your name. Anyway, yeah. So, no, yeah, whether he's the guy to kind of to utilize that much kind of firepower, I'm not sure. They obviously moved away from Crawford, so yeah, maybe bring in another American QB. I'm not sure, but yeah, I think passing game is what they want to do, and add some experience to the back end with defense as well in the DBs, because they didn't perform that well. Their front seven was obviously outstanding, but they didn't get enough turnovers on defense with interceptions and so on.
Yeah, I could see them adding another really good American DB for sure. Yeah, so moving on to Hamburg, kind of the belle of the ball here. Fell short in their championship 2 years in a row. 2 heartbreakers for Sea Devils fans. A lot of changes in Hamburg. Let's talk about Brett Morgan, an offensive coordinator entering Hamburg. You know him well. Tell us about Brett Morgan's offense.
Yeah, I've been lucky enough to play for him twice. Great coach. Preparation, unreal. Like, I've never met anyone that prepares like he does. His attention to detail, his work ethic is unbelievable. He demands a lot from his players because he wants to win. Do you know what I mean? If you want to win, that's what you do, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I believe that he'll go after a dual threat QB. I think that when I played with him before, that's what he's done. He believes that dual threat QBs can win in Europe, adds dynamism to your offense, and it's fair enough. So I think that's what he'll go for, which is obviously what Hamburg didn't have last year. They didn't have that dynamism. They were just run,
right.
Which is annoying because they had 2 American receivers. Do you know what I mean? And obviously going into the season, they thought, hey, look, we've got a German QB who's serviceable. Throw it to these Americans and they'll make the plays. Right. That didn't happen, and Glenn Tonga became the bell cow. So yeah, I know they had a bunch of retirements on defense. So yeah, I think maybe pick up a few pieces on defense, maybe like an edge rusher maybe to fill Adebale's role, and American QB I believe is what they'll do.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating to see what Hamburg does. I think no matter what, I think Yogi Jones is doing a great job. He's a good head coach. Mm-hmm. He'll keep the core of that Hamburg team together, and because of the talent around Hamburg, I think the Sea Devils are in a position to be one of the top teams again in 2023.
I agree.
Anyway, that does it for this episode. Thank you for listening to Cover 7's Week 1 recap of the ELF offseason. Tune in next week for Week 2.